Oh look, another YouTube video with a contrarian title that is meant to purposefully incite discourse among fans. Surely nothing bad will come of it. Okay, now I think I have to preface this before I begin. I do love the John Wick series. These movies are about badasses doing badass things with badass fight scenes and badasses that are badass. Keanu Reeves does such an amazing job and is so dedicated to his craft that he trained for hundreds of hours with hand-to-hand combat and firearms in preparation for the first John Wick movie at 50 years old, and continued throughout the whole franchise. I couldn't see anyone else in the driver's seat for these films. Reeves just has an insane aura overload that blends perfectly into the aesthetic and setting of the John Wickiverse. And if I had a nickel for every time Keanu Reeves played a badass character with the first name John, I'd have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened 3 times. The John Wick movies kind of revitalize the one-man army against the world that sometimes stars a different actor as the same character, movie trope, as I like to call it, that had kind of fallen off to the wayside up until about 2014. Taken 2 and 3 were a mess. Jason Bourne, the movie, yeah, the last one was just called Jason Bourne, was pretty mediocre, and Jack Reacher is now Thad Castle.
9/11, baby! 9/11! Never forget!
The point I'm trying to make is that these franchises, and more which had good starting off points, kind of fell off as they kept going on because they couldn't keep telling interesting stories, or the stories just became so convoluted and so uninteresting that they just became boring, and all you do is search for the cool fight scenes from those movies as clips on YouTube every 3 years or so. Now, I'm not saying John Wick is there yet, but there's been some questionable consistency in the writing with each new entry. I feel as the series has progressed from this obscure neo-noir action thriller from a struggling writer to a massive global franchise with spin-offs and a TV show. Don't worry, we'll talk about that too. I feel as though it lost some of its identity. Where they made up for in stunts and bigger, more grandiose action sequences, they lacked a coherent plot and the semi-realism the series began with. And now that I'm not making 3-hour-long video essays on a step-sibling romance anime, by the way, you should go watch that too if you haven't already, I feel like I can air my opinions out. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video, right after a word from our sponsor. Ha, psych, gotcha. I am not that big yet, but just know if you ever see a link for Raid Shadow Legends, Raycons, or fucking BetterHelp in my video description, you'll know my cat took over my channel, because there is no way I am promoting that shit. Do you not have any morals, Daniel? Do you just want money? Would you take a gambling sponsorship? You would, wouldn't you? Alright, let's get into it. I think a little background will help us understand this series a bit better. John Wick was the brainchild of screenwriter and producer Derek Kolstad. Prior to creating the franchise, he actually doesn't have a ton of work. The most famous things he worked on were One in the Chamber and The Package, both of which he is credited as a screenwriter for. Bro, did this movie seriously only make $1,500 at the box office? Oh my god. In the book titled They Shouldn't Have Killed His Dog, the complete, uncensored ass-kicking, oral history of John Wick, Gun Fu, and the New Age of Action, which yes, I did buy and read for the sole purpose of making this video, Kolstad describes how, with John Wick, I wanted to explore what would happen if the worst man in existence found salvation. Would it be true to his core? And when the source of that salvation is torn away from him, what happens? Do the gates of Hades open? John's the kind of guy who walks into a room and has everything laid out in his mind like it's a chess game. In the underworld, he's a legend, and he's been away long enough that the young up-and-comers have heard the name, but don't necessarily believe all the stories. And this is definitely John Wick. The Continental was there. Charon was there. Winston was there. The coins, all those pieces of the world were there. And the body count was like 11. I think in the first movie it was 84. When I was writing the script, I was thinking about Miller's Crossing, and that scene where Albert Finney takes the cigar out and puts it down. And you're thinking, something's coming. I think that came out in 1990, but I was 16 and I had watched Raising Arizona religiously. So when I saw Miller's Crossing for the first time, I was just kind of stunned and going, that is not what I was expecting. And to keep revisiting it, it keeps getting better and better. Then I realized that the last 5 minutes of Miller's Crossing wouldn't work if Gabriel Byrne hadn't told Albert Finney what he was up to. And then you have the classic line that you could argue is him breaking his own rule, or it was part of the long con, when he kills John Turturro's Bernie and goes, "What heart?" And you're just like, oh shit, I've rooted for this guy? I think what makes these characters, even going back to Get Carter and what Paul Newman was to this sort of genre space, is the humor. When Gabriel Byrne talks to her about the dream of him losing his hat, and she goes, "Did you go catch it?" And he goes, "No. Why? There's nothing stupider than a man running after his own hat." If you didn't have those little moments, it wouldn't work as well. Like when Tom owes money to the bookies and he gets punched in the gut, and the enforcer says, "Tell him it's not personal." Like, shit, Tom, he knows that. Stuff like that. The humanity makes the levity and humor of it all the better. There are a ton more great excerpts from this book about the background and the behind the scenes of how this all started, and it was really cool to read about. If you're a fan of the series and want to know more, I would highly suggest picking it up. Derek Kolstad knew what John Wick was even before the movie was titled John Wick. Originally, it was actually under the name Scorn, and Kolstad had Clint Eastwood in mind to play the character of John Wick, who originally was supposed to be in his mid-70s and named after Kolstad's maternal grandfather. Reeves was actually the one who suggested that Kolstad rename the movie to John Wick. But the idea of the secret assassin society, John being a widow, the gold coins, his car, the Continental, even Winston and Sharon, were all there from the very beginning. There were a few script rewrites, but the time from the script being sold to the movie being shown on screen was 10 months. That's basically same-day shipping in the film world. And the first John Wick movie was actually almost never made. There were a ton of financial setbacks. Because this film was basically an indie movie with some large names attached to it, producers were skeptical to give it much or any more towards it. It was almost canceled 5 days before shooting, but salary concessions were made, and Reeves even put in some of his own money to fund it. In the end, it got made and spawned one of the best action franchises of the century. But it's interesting to read how close it was from never even happening. I'm glad that after so much stress and uncertainty, the payoff was worth it for Kolstad, so he could continue contributing to the franchise he created, which has generated hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Oh, we'll talk about that later too. Noir, which means black in French, is a film genre centered around cynical attitudes and motivations that was extremely popular in the 1940s and 50s. Movies such as Sunset Boulevard, The Big Sleep, and The Lady from Shanghai capture this bleak aesthetic for which the genre is known for. Is John Wick solely a noir film? Absolutely not. In fact, it takes much more inspiration from the neo-noir movement of the 70s and 80s. Movies like Blade Runner, Chinatown, and Blue Velvet capture the aesthetic John Wick is going for much more. But you can still see the elements in both styles, especially in its opening with the blue tint, dialogue, and motivations of the character early on. In the movie, Kolstad even talks a little bit about how he came up with the style of John Wick. I love hearing people say they love John Wick, but then they say how new it was. I'm like, good God, man, no it ain't. It's all the shit I grew up with and loved. I'm 46, and I'm a child of the 80s, but I watch my grandfather's movies. I watch my father's movies and genres, especially noir and crime thrillers, and they always had the same heartbeat. Yet what ended up happening in my life was Die Hard, Predator, and Lethal Weapon, which all came out during the same 3-year stretch. Suddenly, you're like, oh shit, you can do that. And then you add Aliens into the mix and Black Rain, and you're like, oh, you can do a samurai movie against a present day landscape while you're still in Tokyo. The possibilities were endless. The French did noir movies so well, even though I prefer the Japanese approach. They looked cooler and were better paced. The French noir, huge respect, but they're slow. One of my favorite movies of all time is still The Third Man with Orson Welles. But that one was a little bit of an outlier because it's funny. But to me, noir is still the ability to tell a story without dialogue. This is something that the later films ditch almost entirely and substitute for less style and more substance. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I really wish they kept at least a hint of it because it's what made the first film so unique and sets it apart from the rest. John Wick 1 ended up making $86 million in the worldwide box office and $44 million in home video sales off a budget of $20 million. This was a huge sigh of relief for the entire team, knowing that their hard work paid off, and it also convinced Lionsgate to greenlight a sequel, which was confirmed in May of 2015. John Feltheimer, the CEO of Lionsgate, stated that they saw John Wick as a multi-title action franchise. Series director Chad Stahelski gives a great quote about developing John Wick Chapter 2. What we wanted to do with the sequel was really about world expansion and how we make the action a little bit bigger, but at the same time interesting and go in a different route. It was all about action design and how we can add a little bit more brutality, I guess, to the action. We wanted to give a rhythm of building you up with the action and then bring you down a little bit with the humor. At the same time, let the audience know that we're not taking ourselves too seriously. In the book, multiple people, including Kolstad, Stahelski, producer Basil Ivanek, cinematographer Dan Lotson, and more, talk about how much more difficult the production of Chapter 2 was compared to 1. Sure, there is a bigger budget, but there's higher expectations, movie studio execs, and a bunch of other moving parts that weren't present in the original. Ivanek says, quote, "Finding the story for John Wick 2 was extraordinarily hard because we didn't have the dog to go back to. That was the thing over and over again. Can this franchise last without the dog? People would joke, oh, don't you have a cat or a turtle? We couldn't just do something like that. We would have writers' rooms of really great, commercial, important writers sit around and going, any ideas? Because we didn't know. We had no idea what to do." All right, let's move on to Chapter 2. Side note, this also has the coolest marketing for the entire series. I love the purple and blue gradient they went for on this, and this poster is just iconic. Anyways, John Wick Chapter 2 picks up right where the first one left off. I kind of like how the first film doesn't resolve with John getting his car back, because it immediately sets up an easy mini-plot and motivator to kick off the next movie. Then, right as John is about to put his old life behind him for the second time, Santino D'Antonio comes to turn in his marker, the debt John owes him for helping him complete his impossible task that allowed him to retire in the first place. This movie sets out to do what Stahelski wanted. It expands the world, or more particularly, the underworld of John Wick. It introduces the High Council, more unspoken rules, the different sects of this world of assassination around the world, and common? What the John Wick films continue to add is this world building. There were bits and pieces mixed in with the first. You originally kind of perceived it to be this hidden society that only a few people knew about or have access to. Now, this is more of a personal gripe that I have, so I'm going to let my opinion be known. I much prefer movies and settings like this, when the secret society, for lack of a better term, is secret. I really like how Harry Potter does it. It's a world where people live in the same setting, but experience two different realities. Wizards are aware of muggles and interact and live amongst them, but they keep their world of wizardry hidden from them. I don't want it all to be homogenous and normal for everyone. I want there to be real people who act surprised, scared, and confused when they see the other world, either intentionally or not. When the members of the, what I'll call secret society, for lack of a better term, mess up, and expose themselves to normal people, I want that to be a big deal. I want there to be repercussions for not abiding to the rules of blending in. And it seems like, as the movies kept being made, the in crowd got bigger and bigger. And this open secret is one everyone in the world knew about, so it's no longer really a secret. Or at least people don't act like it's one. I could be in the minority of thinking this way, but it's just a personal issue I've had with the seriousness since the beginning. But it doesn't really get amplified until Chapter 3, and we'll talk about why later. Now, like I was saying before, John Wick Chapter 2 adds in new elements we weren't aware of, which makes the world more interesting. But I also like a lot of the ambiguity, the unspoken rules, codes, and ethics that are known amongst everyone living in it. John and Cassian, Common's character, play off each other so well and have this mutual respect for one another to make it seem like they have a somewhat extensive history. The movie's second act is its strongest, in my opinion. I think that's where the best action and plot is. I loved the scenes where he's getting his equipment and infiltrating the party and then trying to escape. One of the most memorable parts of the movie is when John and Cassian are fighting, and they crash into the Continental property after falling down the stairs and realize where they are. They stop fighting, get up, and go to the bar for a drink. I love that formality aspect of these movies. How almost, no matter what, people will obey the rules, because they know that there will be consequences if they don't. Then you have the montage of John Wick fighting all the assassins after him once the bounty gets placed on his head. I love that these assassins are hidden in plain sight and all look different. It really builds up the world for how anyone could be a part of this secret society, and they're just hiding in plain sight. The movie's final act is also great, but it has one of my only other complaints. I don't know if I can put it into words, but the soup kitchen and Bowery King just feel so out of place for some reason. Maybe out of place isn't the best way to describe it, because I do love the idea of an internal secret intelligence network of people who are disguised as homeless people who can offer assistance and information for the right price. And I love Lawrence Fishburne, don't get me wrong, but for some reason, I just don't like the Bowery King's character. The final chase of John and Santino, where John fights Ares and the other henchmen, is cool. And in particular, I love how the movie ends. It doesn't copy the first movie, where there is a standoff between the hero and the villain. John, in Chapter 2, is beaten, battered, and bruised, and goes to confront his enemy, but they're both on Continental grounds, where no business can be conducted. Santino taunts John that he can stay there forever, but John just ends up killing him. The expression of everyone else around is perfect. All these people are so used to killing and assassins, but doing it in this location is strictly prohibited. Winston, most of all, knows what will happen now that he has killed on Continental ground. Afterwards, Winston and John meet at the park, where Winston lets John know that a bounty will be placed on his head in 1 hour, and he will be excommunicated from all services normally provided to assassins. I especially love the last part of the movie, where everyone around the park stops to stare at John, showing just how powerful this organization really is. How even the least suspecting people could be out to get him. It was so cool. The film ends with John running with only 1 hour of freedom left. I was so hyped when I saw this movie, I could not wait for Chapter 3. John Wick Chapter 2 is my favorite of the whole franchise. It is nearly perfect from top to bottom. It has an amazing build-up, a fantastic climax, and a terrific finish. It's basically the very definition of the 3-act structure. John Wick Chapter 2 is where everything fits together perfectly, and the world of this series is truly realized. From reading the book, it seemed like Kolstad was worried that he wasn't going to be able to live up to the standards set in the first film, but I highly disagree, and I think he knocked it out of the park with Chapter 2. There is a clear divide in style and structure between Chapters 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and I think I know the reason why. See, John Wick Chapter 2 did very well again in the box office. grossing over double the amount of Chapter 1. Lionsgate knew they had a huge new franchise on their hands. Chad Stahelski, the director of the first 2 John Wick movies, confirmed in October of 2016, 5 months before the premiere of Chapter 2, that a 3rd installment was ordered by Lionsgate. He would be confirmed to return as the director shortly after, alongside Ian McShane, Lawrence Fishburne, and the late Lance Reddick, who would all reprise their roles. Oh, and of course, Mr. Wick himself, Keanu Reeves. Derek Kolstad was also slated to return as the screenwriter for Parabellum. However, in this iteration for the series, Shay Hayton, Chris Collins, and Mark Abrams were also included alongside him. Prior to Parabellum, Shay Hayton wrote a spec script focusing on Stephen King's directing his only featured film, Maximum Overdrive, and another one focusing on The Ballerina, the John Wick spin-off movie. This script would end up being purchased by Lionsgate and is set to be released later this year, as of the time of making this video. Hayton was then brought onto the team for Chapter 3 and eventually Chapter 4. Chris Collins has had a bit more of a storied past working on hit shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, and Sons of Anarchy, among others. And Mark Abrams has writing credits on The Bernie Mac Show, Entourage, and Breaking In. Now, I think I can kind of address what this whole video essay has really been about. It only took
21 minutes and 32 seconds
to get here. I think there is a clear split in the personality and tone between John Wick Chapters 1 and 2 and the rest of the franchise. I could tell almost immediately after exiting the theater upon finishing Chapter 3, and I absolutely knew it after Chapter 4. There's an excerpt in the book where Gross writes, "Despite the fact that it only had been 7 years since Kolstad wrote the spec script for Scorn, by the time that John Wick Chapter 3 arrived in theaters, the franchise had grown considerably from its modest beginnings. To further the ever more elaborate story, the producers brought in a number of writers, including Kolstad, to work on it. The final draft was a script based on a story by Derek Kolstad and screenplay credited to Kolstad, Chris Collins, Mark Abrams, and Shay Hayton." And Kolstad adds to this quote and gives insight on what happens when you create a new hit franchise. "Oftentimes, it's the best idea that wins, and then you hand it off. It's such a Hollywood thing that happens all the time where one writer or writing team does 70 drafts, and then they want to do one more draft and there are 9 notes. But then they say, let's go to that guy who's like $1 million a week. And you're like, what? It just happens. You just have to give the thing your blessing and are like, cool, let me know what you need. I think in any industry, especially any movie at a certain point, it isn't a matter of becoming bigger than you. You just have to respect the process without truly understanding where the hell you fit into it. I'm a baby writer, man. I was on a Zoom yesterday with Chris Morgan of Fast and Furious, and he'd say, you know what it's like on set? Not really. On John Wick 1 and 2, I was on set a bit, but come John Wick 3, it's a machine flipping pages. But I understand it. It's one of those things where if you get enough of these things made, you move into a producer's role. I would argue that it isn't the money, it isn't the control, it's just being in the room. You're not one of the cool kids, but you happen to be in the room when someone happens to say something off the cuff that's cool. We could do this. Better idea, we could do that. That's good, there's no ego at that point. Again, it's best idea that wins. At this point in 2019, John Wick is no longer a moonshot indie project with an A-list actor attached. It's a blockbuster franchise bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars in gross revenue. The budgets are getting bigger, and the studios are expecting an even bigger return. And it seems to be the common downside with franchises like this. Once you have 1 or 2 good movies, the original writers' ideas can kind of get sidetracked for what the producers want to do with the checkbooks. Now, I think I need to preface this by saying that I don't think any of the John Wick movies are bad. In fact, they're all enjoyable, and some of my favorite action scenes from the franchise come directly from the later entries. My gripe is how the tone shifted from this neo-noir presentation with minimal dialogue and a mysterious world and cast of characters to a franchise specifically centered around introducing as many people as possible to make spin-offs of them, leaving its original identity behind. What's interesting to note is that although each movie gets longer in length, John Wick actually isn't talking that much more. He only says around 500 words in each movie he's in. The other characters are the ones that are doing the most talking, which is expected, but they're doing a lot more talking in each subsequent movie. I don't need to know every intricate detail of how everything works in the secret world of assassination. Make me a fly on the wall, observing these people and how they would talk and act as if it were real. Show, don't tell. Don't conveniently explain objects or processes and procedures in such a way that you're almost breaking the fourth wall. Leave some mystery in it. In rewatching chapters 3 and 4, I noticed this a lot. And again, I have to say this to reiterate because I know people who are watching this will leave a comment saying that I don't want them to explain anything. That isn't true. Let's take an example from this scene in John Wick 1, where he's getting ready to go after Yosef Tarasov. While Yosef's father is berating him for stealing John Wick's car and killing his dog, we see John go down into his basement with a sledgehammer. Side note, Michael Nyqvist's performance during this is perfection.
The boogeyman? Well, John wasn't exactly the boogeyman. He was the one you sent to kill the fucking boogeyman. Oh.
This is the exact type of revealing or exposition dialogue I want to see in John Wick movies. Should Yosef probably know who John Wick already is? Yeah, probably, but I can excuse it in this case to make for a cool reveal. While this dialogue is happening, John breaks the floor in his basement and opens a crate to reveal a slew of guns, knives, smoke grenades, and gold coins. He then showers and we see the tattoos on his back. One that reads Fortis Fortuna Aiduvat, which translates to Fortune favors the bold. He also has a cross with a scar through it on his left shoulder, a flame symbol on his upper left back, and a wolf on his upper right back, and prayer hands over a cross in the middle of his back. Immediately from this shot, we can tell that he has a storied past, presumably with not-so-good people. There are a lot of theories as to the symbolic meanings of these, which I'm not going to get into for this video, but as an audience member watching this for the first time, we can tell that John Wick is or was associated with bad people. This all happens in the span of 3 minutes, and we already know everything we need to about John Wick. Everything else is a mystery, or will be revealed as the movie goes on, and I love it. It makes us ask ourselves questions about who this character is, what their past was, and doesn't make someone in the movie answer that directly or immediately. Now, let's compare that to a scene in Chapter 3. I actually love the opening of Chapter 3. We pick up immediately where Chapter 2 left off. John is running through downtown New York City, disoriented because he's injured and doesn't know who around him could be blending in to finally attack him once his immunity is up. We then see the corporate office of the Secret Assassin Society, where they use old IBM terminals, chalkboards, and typewriters to organize everything. They're also all covered in tattoos and wear pink blouses and gray skirts, while counting down the time until John is excommunicadoed. It builds up the intensity, and I love it. The subsequent action scenes are incredible as well, with him making a gun in the shop and riding a horse through the streets. Unfortunately, I think a lot of my problems from this movie stem from the Adjudicator and Zero. I just think they both speak too much. I like Asia Kate Dillon and Mark Dacascos's performances. However, I feel like if their dialogue was cut down by half, it would have immediately made the movies better. Zero's introduction reflects my animosity towards this character. We see the Adjudicator arrive at a sushi place, and she slides over a coin, showing who she is. Zero, as well as everyone else in the world, knows what is going on with John Wick, but they kind of just rehash the events before she asks Zero to help punish the people that helped John Wick. Also, you'd think that John, being as highly regarded as he is, would have the highest level assassins, such as Zero, go after him, not his students while he works at a sushi shop. Especially after he's already killed like a dozen of them, but I digress. Zero then later reveals to be a fanboy of John Wick, and there's some Marvel-esque humor shoved in which makes me dislike his character even more. I don't think every movie needs the trope of character who acts cool for a second just to turn around and be a secret nerd and talk about it. One of my least favorite types of characters, to be honest. I think all the characters, or at least if you're an assassin in this world, should refer to that strong silent type. Mutual respect and little words spoken, like how typical assassins you would assume interact. Zero doing all this talking and being super sorry he has to kill John kind of breaks the immersion of this world for me. I'd much rather have the main villain or rival to John be like what we got with Ruby Rose as Ares, or Common as Cassian. Ares was literally mute, but she was still a badass and posed a threat to John. And Cassian, although he talked, did so sparingly and gave off the same aura as John. Both of these characters were much cooler and felt much more real in this world than Zero or the Adjudicator. What's funny is that originally, Stahelski says that Zero was supposed to be a super serious Japanese sensei, but it was Stahelski's decision to change the character of Zero to reflect how Mark Dacascos is in real life. Very happy and energetic. That's where the fanboy came from. I can't say I agree with Stahelski's decision on that one. From reading the book, it did seem like Dacascos really enjoyed being able to flesh out Zero in his own way and give him his own personality, which I think is cool, but it just wasn't for me. I don't know who originally created the character of Zero, but I think they got it right the first time. The talkification of these characters is a trend that happens with Kane, the Tracker, and Marquise in Chapter 4. You could even argue the Bowery King's character seems a little out of place, but due to the soup kitchen kind of having its own adjacent look and feel, I can let it slide. Lionsgate knew that they could only make so many movies about Keanu as John Wick, and that if they wanted to keep the franchise alive and making more money, they had to flesh out the minor characters in the movies to give them a potential spin-off, which in theory I'm not against, but I don't like the way they executed it. They could have just gone the way of the ballerina and create a brand new character in the same universe, which I'd much rather prefer. As of the time of making this video, there has already been one prequel spin-off TV show in the Continental. Don't worry, we'll still talk about it. Another spin-off focused on Ana de Armas as one of the ballerina assassins we see in Chapter 3, an untitled Kane prequel, a character introduced in Chapter 4, another untitled prequel movie, and now a fifth official John Wick movie. This isn't even counting the amount of potential other spin-offs that have been rumored or brought up, including a Bowery King movie, a Sophia movie, and crossovers with other franchises. It's fair to say that John Wick has expanded into a worldwide franchise, and I think there's a lot of good that can come from that, but equally a lot of bad. For one, the series has divided itself of any of the neo-noir aesthetic, a signature of the first two movies, but particularly the first. It instead has gone down the traditional and generic grand action road. I think a lot of this comes from losing cinematographer Jonathan Sella, who worked on the first movie. Dan Lotson, who replaced him for 2 through 4, doesn't quite have the same cinematic vision. The plots also keep getting bigger and bigger with higher and higher stakes, which you kind of need to do in order to one-up the previous film. The first one was grounded in New York, with John going after the person who stole his car and killed his dog. The second has him travel to Italy to repay a debt he owes someone. The The third has him being chased by the entire world, and he has to travel to the middle of a desert to seek redemption. And the fourth has him go on a one-man army war campaign to destroy the High Table. And I'm not saying I'm against the world expanding or getting new revelations about the history and traditions of this society. But what started off as very grounded, very mysterious, and very ominous has lost its grounded, mysterious, ominous feel over time, which I'm disappointed by. Is the action and stunts better? Absolutely. Is John Wick a series you primarily watch for the plot? Not really. But I don't think that's an excuse to not have a well-crafted or coherent one. One thing I was surprised to read about in Gross's book was an excerpt from Ray Morton, a film journalist for Script Magazine, who writes about some of my mirrored complaints in Chapter 3. John Wick Chapter 3 is far too long. 2 hours and 23 minutes is far too long for a confection such as this. No matter how tasty, no one wants 20 pounds of dessert. John Wick does not seem himself in this movie. The man who in the previous 2 films has been an expert, relentless, and fearless assassin who is always 2 steps ahead of everyone else, here seems frequently overwhelmed and out of his depth. His skills don't seem to be nearly as sharp as they once were, and his opponents frequently gain an advantage over him. The boogeyman has been transformed into a scared man on the run. It could be because Derek Kolstad, the creator and sole screenwriter in the first 2 movies, was rewritten by several other screenwriters this time around, but the movie seems to have lost sight of its protagonist. As colorful and entertaining as the supporting characters are, they are given too much attention this time, often relegating Wick to secondary status in too many of the scenes. Nowhere is this more evident than in the North African sequence, which introduces Halle Berry as Sophia, the manager of the Casablanca Continental. Sophia is a tough and fearless fighter who is ably aided by her 2 highly trained and heavily armored pet dogs. It's great to see her and the dogs in action, but during the shootout in the Kasbah, almost all of the focus is on her. Wick is given scant attention and even goes completely missing for big chunks of the sequence. Nothing against Halle Berry, who doesn't love Halle Berry, but we're here to see John Wick kick ass, not Sophia. In fact, the entire Casablanca sequence is pretty pointless. It really exists as a showcase for Berry rather than to do anything to advance the plot in any meaningful way. It could have been cut entirely from the film with no significant effect, and, as a bonus, would have brought the movie down to a much more manageable length. There is much more visible CGI in this movie. One of the cool things about the first 2 movies is that the action scenes seem to be done for real, which added greatly to their excitement and effectiveness. I have no doubt that CGI was used to enhance these sequences, but apart from some of the blood spurts, it wasn't obvious. In Parabellum, it's obvious, which undermines their believability and effectiveness. Finally, there is no ending. The previous films ended on a cliffhanger, but it concluded its primary narrative first when Wick killed D'Antonio. This time, the primary narrative is not concluded. The film just seems to stop at the story's midpoint. I know there's going to be a John Wick Chapter 4, but that doesn't make up for leaving us hanging on Chapter 3. But none of these flaws are fatal. Parabellum is still a very entertaining movie. However, I hope Chapter 4 gets the series back to the leaner, more relentless paradigm of the first 2 installments. I've hinted at it already during this video, but I believe this series has a serious case of bloatedness, where the runtime keeps increasing without having a plot to justify it. If you go back and watch Chapter 4, there are a lot of scenes that overstay their welcome. The first one that comes to mind is the card game at the club, where John Wick is sent to kill this German gangster to be allowed back into the family. He arrives, but then somehow Stick and the tracker do as well, and they play a game of 5-card draw. The dialogue throughout this whole scene is bad at best and cringeworthy at worst. It doesn't make much sense to move the plot forward and overstays its welcome far too long. John Wick Chapter 4 adds 70 minutes of runtime compared to Chapter 1 and 40 minutes compared to Chapter 3. There is no need for this movie to be nearly 3 hours long. It doesn't justify it. He likes the movies and even gave praise to parts in Chapter 3. But ultimately, the story and style, he and I both seem to agree, was a step down in quality. There isn't much in the book to quote about the production of John Wick Chapter 4, but a lot of my gripes from 3 do transfer over to 4. I remember immediately being caught off guard at the fact that the movie starts in New York, and the next scene has John back in the desert where he was in the last movie to go kill the Elder. They travel in these movies like they're walking down the street. Also, immediately after Winston gets his hotel back after making a deal with the adjudicator, another bigwig with a weird title comes to basically say the same thing, and the whole conflict starts over. I was okay with the fact that the High Table made Winston pay for not immediately killing John Wick after he killed Santino in the Continental. Even though I think it would have been cool to have a rule to allow said person to have like an hour before they're hunted down. But this plotline is just ridiculous. We're just repeating them at this point. What was the point of the deal at the end of the last movie if the same issue is being brought up again by a new, higher-ranked person on a new technicality? Also, this green screen is hideous. I didn't really notice any or much in Chapter 3, but in Chapter 4, it is extremely prevalent and just looks subpar. The plot of Chapter 4 is extremely trivial and doesn't make much sense. In the first 10 minutes, Marquise, a dude from the High Table, excommunicates Winston, kills Sharon, and blows up the Continental. This serves zero purpose to the plot besides maybe making Marquise look threatening. John then meets Winston at Sharon's grave, and Winston suggests that he invokes the old duel tradition and challenge Marquise. But John literally could have either 1. Already known about this, 2. Met Winston somewhere for him to tell John about this, or 3. Done this already in the 3rd movie. The whole Winston and Continental plotline just seems very out of place. The one stipulation is that John can only challenge someone to a duel representing a crime family, so he has to kill someone to be let back into the Rushka Roma family. But couldn't he have already done that in Chapter 3 with or without his ticket? Also, there is a side plot with the tracker not killing John even when he has the opportunity to, because the bounty isn't high enough yet. But even when it is, because John saves his dog, the tracker ends up not killing John to mirror back to the first movie. John Wick Chapter 4, unfortunately for me, has a lot of problems. The plot is bad, the new characters are uninteresting and ruin the immersion, plus it also looks bad a lot of the time with the CGI. However, there are elements that I do like, notably the action, and the most famous scene from this movie is the over-the-top camera angle of the dragon's breath inside the apartment complex, which was insane. I remember watching it in theaters when it came out and was blown away for how awesome and how long it went on for. The movie ends with John killing Marquise and then dying. Winston gets his hotel back and is reinstated, and the cliffhanger is that Akira is after Stick because he killed her dad. In all honesty, this is the worst movie in the franchise so far. It felt completely void of any resemblance of the first 3, much less the first 2, and I bet a big reason why is because this was the first movie without Derek Kolstad as a screenwriter. Instead, it was written by Shay Hayton and Michael Finch. And according to Kolstad, it wasn't his decision. It was Lionsgate's. No, it wasn't my decision, he said. When you think of the contracts of these things, the third one I shared the credit with any number of people, and they didn't have to come back to me, and so they didn't. And so you look at that, and you could be hurt. And I would say, if it was 20 years ago, I would have been. But seeing what the industry is and how things go, I just believe that you bless everything and hope it all the best. And all the players involved who are doing other things elsewhere. And yeah, it's personal, so I'm never going to talk shit about John Wick. I just want this thing to survive and thrive. I know I'm not the only one who has shared animosity towards the later films. They've obviously performed very well and have gotten great reviews from critics and audiences alike. But it's sad to see the identity Kolstad helped create has slowly been washed away with each new film. I'm hoping that the spin-offs end up bringing it back to a more grounded, realistic world. But I can't say I'm holding my breath. Oh, I almost forgot. Let's do my quick review of the Continental TV series. Okay, in all honesty, it was fine. It's only 3 episodes, with some decent action sequences mixed in, and tells the story of how Winston came to own the Continental with some more background and lore of the world. I wasn't a huge fan of the plot or the side characters. I'm not the first person to say this, but as always, the hard thing about making a TV show spinoff surrounding pre-established characters is that they're alive in the future, so there aren't any stakes. We both know that Winston and Sharon are alive, so they can't die. That leaves the rest of the cast open for the chopping block, but with such a limited amount of time, you never really develop to care for any of them. Young Winston, played by Colin Woodell, is fine enough, but I didn't ever really feel like he gave a headlining superstar performance compared to Keanu Reeves in the John Wick series. The series might appeal to John Wick fans, and it has some elements that resemble the movies, but it's missing the John Wick element. I feel like the showrunners knew this, and that's why they decided to include him so prevalently in the ballerina advertising. If you're super into John Wick, I guess this is a series you can't pass up on, but just know that Derek Kolstad nor Chad Stahelski had any work to do with this miniseries. And that kind of wraps up everything I had to say for the John Wick series so far. Like I mentioned, there are already a ton of spin-offs planned, including the ballerina, which is set to come out later this year. I might do a quick review on it after I go see it. The series is absolutely nowhere near dead, which I'm happy for. And I hope this video doesn't come off as me hating the series. As much as I've talked about my complaints, it's only because I know it has the ability to live up to a much higher potential that it hasn't been reaching as of late. I do love the series. I feel like I need to reiterate that. But if you agree or disagree with some of my complaints, let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and a comment. If you want to see more content similar to this, make sure to subscribe. I have a few other video essays talking about other media I enjoy on my channel, so make sure to check those out. I appreciate anyone who's been supportive of the channel lately, so thank you a ton. But yeah, that's all it from me. And until then, I will see you all next time.